Hello, everyone. This is Cascadia Composers. Um, our June Composer Insight features Stephen James, and the topic is Oregon Soundscapes solo piano project, which is coming up next season. He's going to be discussing that project, and at the end, he'll explain what will happen next with going through some of the submissions. Thank you. And it's all yours, Stephen. Thank you.
All right, awesome. Yeah, as I said, I'm Steven. So basically, I'm a pianist. I'm from Oregon. I'm also a composer. More recently, decided to focus on this as kind of my primary calling. I got my bachelor's and master's degrees in piano at the University of Oregon. I took a year off, and I'm going to go back to school this fall and go to Peabody to get a master's degree in composition with Kevin Putz. So, I hopefully, when all that's done, will be very well educated. Basically, the way this is going to work tonight, I'm going to talk about my project with Oregon Soundscapes, which started a year ago with myself and Andrew Canestra, who you notice is here. He's been my partner in crime with this project. We were both students of the head of the piano department at U of O, who's Alexandra Docine. And we all met up with him last June, I think, and we talked about, he kind of pitched his idea for us to, sort of commissioned us to each write a set of piano pieces for his studio to perform, and he wanted the pieces to be about Oregon. He wanted them to be kind of miniatures, so 2 to 6 minutes each, and each piece was written specifically for a student pianist in Dr. Docine's studio, and they're ranging from, I think the youngest was a freshman undergrad. And then the oldest, I think, was, again, we had some doctoral students who were playing. And Andrew and I both wrote pieces for each other, too. I wrote a piece for him, which is Shades of Pristine, which we'll talk about tonight. He wrote a piece for me I think it was inspired by Cape Blanco, in the gale at Cape Blanco. And that was a fun piece to, I might like give the link to it. I might share the link to his recordings of his soundscapes because they were very cool as well.
Do you want me to drop it in the chat, Stephen?
Yeah, absolutely. You should. You should. That would be a really wonderful resource for them to have. So, anyways, that's kind of how this whole thing started, and Dr. Docine wanted the soundscapes to be about Oregon. He wanted a set of pieces specifically, for piano about Oregon, and the stipulation that he gave us was it has to be on the keyboard. Keyboard only, no inside the piano extended techniques. Not that I'm against extended techniques. I actually went and asked him in the middle of the process, and I said, "Hey, can I write something with some inside the piano stuff?" And he was like, "No, because our piano technician will not be happy." So this is often the problem that we run into, by the way, with a lot of college, a lot of college music departments especially piano departments, are very sensitive about letting people do weird things with their instruments that cost $100,000, or in the case of a 9-foot Steinways, I think they're $200,000. So, anyways, I'm going to share my screen, and we can get underway. Application. Where? Wait, documents. No, wait. Slideshow. Wait, we want to go home. Here. Let me just share my screen here, and then I will go from there. Screen sharing, and this document will be here. So this was the cover that I used for our concert, and display. No. Was this it? This was it. There we go. We got it. Okay, so this was kind of the cover they used for concert. This picture is from this was a sunset at Cape Perpetua, which is a place that I frequent often. And this is actually something else that we did when we had our initial performance premiere, which you'll hear some of the recordings tonight. We had a projector up that where Andrew and I had taken photos of each place that we had a soundscape written about, and we had that up in the background while we were sharing the music. And I'm really hoping we can do something similar. So something that I'm going to do when I select the composers from the score call is ask for a photo or two or three that kind of go with the theme of the soundscape, so that we can have a visual background to go with the sonic landscape. So anyways, I did a little bit of research about what is a soundscape. Is this in the way here? I'm going to put this down here. So the idea of a soundscape, I did some research on this. First thing that popped up was R. Murray Schafer's book, The Soundscape of Our Sonic Environment and the Tuning of the World. And I just did I did not read the book all the way through. I just did a little bit of skimming, but it's something I'm definitely going to look at more in the future, because it seems very relevant to this project, where the idea of a soundscape is kind of the environment, the world around us, and capturing that. And especially if we want, it can tell so many different stories, just like details in a painting are what makes the painting matter. And, there's little parts of a soundscape, and every place has its own soundscape. Like when you're at home, you have a different soundscape than when you're at the coast or when you're in the city. When you're in your car, there's a different soundscape, a different sound world for every place. And, it's immersive. It also, and it's basically the sum total of everything that we are experiencing with our ears and that our brain isn't processing. And funny thing is that sometimes we process things out, and other things that we notice, right? Like sometimes you won't notice certain sounds, and sometimes you'll notice some sounds. And the idea is that, some sounds can become like a pattern, a looping pattern that can become almost hypnotic or meditative. But anyway, a soundscape, sum total, is a sonic sensation. The idea of a soundscape, the idea of environmental sound is something that we've had for a long time, ever since we could first record sound, on the phonograph or whatever, and then play it back through records or piano rolls or whatever, or stuff like that. Whenever we could transmit sounds, this is something that people have been trying to figure out how to use. And since music counts as sounds, we've been wanting to learn how to use music and play it back. And, psychologically, people want to figure out how to use sound and soundscapes to help people respond to certain things from the environment, or trigger specific memories, specific emotions. It's like the Pavlovian dog, where the dog is trained to respond to the sound of getting their food. Now that's a fairly common thing, but we all know the sound is like the sound of your phone. We know that the sound of your phone notification means that you have a message, and it's because you set that message. If you didn't have familiarity with it previously, you just think it's a random noise. But if you had heard other people's phone sounds, you say, oh, maybe that is someone's message. It's like if you're in the middle of a concert and someone's phone starts going off, their ringer, even if they have the more outlandish the ringer, the more entertaining it is. And usually the more embarrassing it is for them. But more entertaining it is for everyone else to... But everyone knows it's the phone going off, even if it's like a song. So we have these associations with different sounds. We can have positive associations, we can have negative associations with a sound world. But soundscapes in music is something, you can take these, these associations with sounds, and we can use that to craft a musical experience that tells a story. So fundamentally, we've gotten very much into the weeds as far basically like, oh, I know what this is. This is what music is, right? It's a series of sounds. But, I thought this was a good place to start because I know I, for a long time, fell into the trap of just assuming music is one specific thing. Music is just one specific set of sounds. Music is just, piano. Music is something that's played on the piano, or music is something that is sung, or music is something that has a specific group of sounds. And, you have expectations for what music should sound like. And then if you hear something that's alien to that or foreign to that, you say, oh, that's not music. It was for a long time, that was kind of the favorite insult that really conservative music concert reviewers would use to denigrate new music. They say, oh, that's not music, that's trash, or something like that. But I find as composers, you can't be in that position. You have to be on the other side of that. You have to be the one saying, okay, how can we redefine our concept of what sound is? And how can we use sound, create sounds that connect to the imaginations of our audience, and make them feel something, right? That's always the goal of the composers. How can we make it feel something? How can we make our audience feel something, right? Hopefully it's not feeling anger or frustration at the low quality of our music, right? But we want, that's usually our goal, is to, create an emotional experience for our audience, or sometimes an intellectual experience. Not all music is meant to be, romantic and effusive and expressive, although it can be. And some of my favorite music is that way. But music can also be an intellectual experience. It can be an experience of curiosity. It can be an experience of wonder, or just meditation. But in any way, the soundscape is meant to provide the background for an emotional narrative, and it stimulates the whole concept of a piece. So what are some characteristics of a musical soundscape? In my opinion, a soundscape is more often going to be literal than abstract. Like an abstract soundscape. It's like abstract music. Abstractions in music would be, say, you're thinking about it from the theory perspective. You're thinking about it from like, okay, this is the chord progression, or this is the melody, this is the harmony, this is the form. And the soundscape is the opposite of that. It's literally, what do you hear? What do your ears tell you? What is the sonic imagery that we are experiencing? And so in my opinion, if we're trying to write a specific soundscape, it doesn't have to be built around a melody. And if it is, maybe that melody is meant more to be somewhat diegetic, which diegetic is music that is, it's like an opera term, where if you're familiar with opera or you've studied opera ever, diegetic music is music that is heard by the characters in the opera, by the characters on stage. They are hearing a song. It's like, and so that's something. So you could use music in that way, in that context of say, this is actually a diegetic experience where the listeners are removed from it and the character is hearing this, and there's several layers to that, but it's a tool that you can use to build your soundscape. It's a tool you can use to build your sound experience. A soundscape may lack a consistent tempo that carries it through from beginning to end. And instead, it happens as like events in time. It could use tempo as a tool to evoke a specific experience, right? Because there are tempos that we experience in nature. There's a tempo that happens when we are running really hard and we feel our heartbeat. Okay, there's a tempo that happens when we're in a car, we're listening to a machine. You hear the throbbing of a machine, da 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 da, like a diesel engine. But of course, if the diesel engine speeds up, da 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 da, right? If it's going up the hill, and so tempos are very rarely, unless it's mechanical, tempos are very rarely perfectly consistent in nature. And this is something interesting because we're often very used to, classical music or contemporary music having a tempo. And sometimes we'll have our music that would, we want it to have a structure. And so there was a comment that was made once when I was playing a piece in a performance class that was I was being very romantic and very trying to be very romantic and very expressive with a piece by Liszt, and I took it very slow. And the piece that's supposed to take 15 minutes took 20 because I was pushing the limits, as a composer sometimes does, in a way that was probably not the most pleasant for the audience, but it was a learning experience for me because the teacher went and said, Dr. Docine went and said, well, sometimes we all want a timeless performance, but we want to make sure that we don't have a tempo-less performance. And yet here I am arguing that, you can in fact have a tempo-less performance that exists, that is also timeless. But of course, we don't necessarily want a tempo-less performance of something that's meant to have a tempo. But we can conceive of music that doesn't rely on tempo as a way to rhythmically give it coherence, is what I'm saying. And I think in a soundscape, you can absolutely try to think outside the box about how are we going to create a sound experience that does not rely on tempo, but instead think about as like sequential events. This happens, and then this happens, and then this happens, and this happens. And the amount of time between them is relative and is really up to the performer and what the performer feels is most natural. And so this is the idea of a soundscape. Things can be even somewhat random, like they are in they are in nature, and the rhythms are often very free with ample room for fluctuation, rubato, and natural pauses. Because imagine if I talked like this, and then like this, and like this, and like this, and I just made a really consistent beat all the time, it would get really annoying. I'm sure that already made you die inside somewhat. So usually when we're talking, we have a flow. We speed up, we slow down. When we're getting more excited, we might talk a little bit faster. And then if we want to focus on something, we take a breath and then make our point. So anyways, a few more characteristics of a soundscape. The harmonic language can be very simple. It doesn't have to be. I have an example of a piece that's harmonically very complex and is very chromatic in a lot of ways. But then I also have an example of a piece, it's actually the one that Andrew played, that for a large section of it only uses 3 notes. It's 3 notes spread across the entire register of the piano, but it only uses 3 notes for a large part of it. And the idea was to create, with that one, was to create a very simple sonority that's more meditative, rather than you forcing the functional harmony, to drive us towards a conclusion. And that's the common practice. That's like what we expect with narrative-focused forms of music, like a sonata or a ballade or what have you, a rondo, right? Classical forms use functional harmony as a way to drive us towards a conclusion, or in this case, drive us towards a cadence, right? We expect, if we go, say, right? You all knew that was coming. You all knew that resolution was coming. So that's kind of the expectations that's set when we set the precedent of using common practice. And that's not to say if you're going to create a soundscape that you can't use common practice harmony. You absolutely can. Again, I have a piece where I use common practice harmony as part of the soundscape. But it doesn't have to be that way. Soundscapes might feel static in some way, perhaps in a very slow changes, like minimalism, or else happening in a loop, right? For instance, you could say a very, very slow change, say, you get the idea. You can create the similar pattern, and it can have a slow change that happens, but then fundamentally, the shape and the pattern remains pretty much the same. And soundscapes can feel static in some way, perhaps, and the idea with this is not that everything remains static, but rather it's like you're doing a science experiment and you want to isolate all the variables and keep all the variables same except one element. And then you can play around with that one element and change that this way, change that way. And then maybe you change another element. You say, okay, I'm going to change this element and this element. Say register and harmony are now both going to change, right? But then tempo and pattern will stay the same, right? Or you say, I'm going to keep the harmony the same, but I'm going to change the pattern. Say you have an A minor chord. So that's even just the same register, the same notes. I just changed the pattern. And then now, maybe if you take that A minor chord, right? So you change the register and you change the rhythm, you change a couple things, but you keep the harmony functionally the same. So the idea is that you create this equalization between compositional elements that, and you make them all equal importance to each other rather than just saying the tempo is the most important or the harmony is the most important and everything else has to follow the harmony, which is how it normally is with playing romantic piano music. You want everything to follow the harmony. Everything kind of follows the harmony. The tempo you might speed up or slow down if you're going towards a cadence. Okay, the dynamics change to follow the cadence. But in a soundscape, everything is equal. So not everything has to be in the same, you don't have to prioritize one thing over another thing just by default. You can do it at different ways throughout the piece and create like a little science experiment almost within the piece. The other thing I would say, soundscape by itself is not a narrative. Okay, it's like a poem, a soundscape. It's a poem, a sound painting, a snapshot in time. The narrative actually comes from the sequence of sonic images strung together, right? So we go from this place that we spent 2 or 3 minutes in as a one soundscape, and then as the piece progresses, we go to the next soundscape. Now we're somewhere else, and then we're somewhere else. But each soundscape by itself needs to focus on one place, one thing. And that's the idea, is that the change and the development happens by, stringing together individual soundscapes, each one of which is focused on one idea. Or a couple ideas. You can have like a couple of related ideas that you'll use to create your piece, but the idea is that they shouldn't be, packed full of ideas. They shouldn't be packed full of everything. You really want to try to isolate your variables, isolate your elements a little bit. And so that, I think, is what makes like the most effective soundscape. And now, of course, you can do this in many different ways. This could be very, very effective if you think about this for an orchestra. You do think about this with a doing this with a chamber ensemble, doing this with electronics or electronic music. But doing it for the piano is something else entirely, because the piano is kind of a limited instrument in a lot of ways. I will talk more about the challenges of writing for piano in a minute, but actually, the piano was also the first place where soundscapes were really invented, because, if you go back to the French Impressionists, Debussy, Ravel, and then, of course, the minimalists like John Cage or Philip Glass, Steve Reich. People might be surprised when I mention Cage as the minimalist, but he absolutely was. He also was a lot of other things. But there's a lot of they're kind of the ones to pioneer the idea of creating literal sounds or sound ideas on the piano. And of course, Debussy was kind of the first one to do it with his images and his preludes, and then Ravel followed up with his mirrors. A more modern example might be Steve Reich's music for 18 musicians, which is over an hour of very slowly changing soundscape that happens. create, and the idea is that you're not listening to every individual note. You're listening to the pattern and the gradual change that happens in the, especially with Steve Reich and the way that his style works is things will go in and out of phase with each other. So that's part of the change that happens, very subtle and slow change that happens. And it's really hypnotic in a way. I have a couple examples here. Yes, I did have a recording of my own playing. This was something I recorded a couple years ago on Bell Hall, and I rather like my recording of the WC here, so I'm going to share a little bit so you get the idea of what this example, kind of what the first, in my opinion, the first real soundscape sounded like. Oh, does the sound coming through? I don't know if the sound comes through here, if I play this or not here.
Yeah, I don't hear it.
Okay. I may have to find another solution for this. We may not get examples right now.
Could you put it into the chat? Maybe we'll get a chance to listen to it at least there later.
Yeah. Let me see. Oh, wait. Is there a way I can share computer sound? Actually. Wait. More. Share computer sound. Do you hear it now? There you go. I still don't hear it, but
yes.
You all hear it.
Yes.
So this is just kind of the first, I'll just play like the first 45 seconds, but you kind of get the idea of how Debussy, creates these, these very watery harmonies is the idea, and he uses all of the all of the, like the whole tone scale or pentatonic scale, I think more so in this case is the pentatonic scale, to create kind of this open sound, this airy sound that we get that's not reliant as much on functional harmony. Anyways, I shouldn't talk too much over this, should I? And now we get the idea of the water arpeggios. And that's kind of where reflections on the water, maybe this part of the soundscape, the water is a little bit more movement to it, a little more motion. So anyways, let me go back to this. No, I want to go to the next slide. No, I don't want to start that. Here we go. Alrighty. So here's some things. Like I said, minimalism. Here's some styles to consider. Minimalism is great for soundscapes. It's not the only way to do it. I'm not saying that you have to write minimalism to write a soundscape. I'm also not saying you have to write 12-tone or serialism to write a soundscape, because I know there's a lot of people who are not a fan of writing in 12-tone. I tried writing in 12-tone. I did not necessarily love the result. Other people said they liked the result. It's a tool. It's a tool in the toolbox that sometimes is helpful and sometimes is not. Just like minimalism is the tool in the toolbox that sometimes is helpful and sometimes it's not. But repeating patterns are common in both nature and technology and become hypnotic or meditative, and you can create things with a multi-layered rhythmic scheme that can be very effective at communicating, say, the sound of a river. Some other suggestions, you can use graphic notation, including aleatoric cells, boxes, arrows, detailed instructions for improvisation, and other diversions from standard notation practices. This can help communicate things more clearly and visually to the performer. I already talked at length about non-functional harmony. like I said about tempo, you don't necessarily have to use a time signature because it imposes a specific pulse or system of subdivisions onto a piece. But soundscapes can often exist in time rather than in tempo. Tempo is used to create symmetry, regularity, and predictable order. And you can put in, different things. You can mess around with that in a lot of different ways. You can do syncopation, you can do rubato and all those things, but fundamentally tempo, there's still a specific like predictable order that comes with it. But a soundscape, you might deal with random or irregular sounds, or patterns of changing or fluctuating speed. And so tempo may not necessarily have to be your default go-to, right? It's why, I was told once that, when you go to sketch a piece, you shouldn't start by just opening up your notation software and writing directly into the piece, because the computer, in order to play it back, automatically has to decide on a tempo. And so really, it has to decide on a tempo. It forces you to decide on a time signature, a key signature, make all these decisions at start, when really, it's better to write things out by hand and just, it's better to write it out by hand and just sketch things out. Like, my sketches I found that the more chaotic my sketches are when I first start writing it out, the better the music ends up being after you refine it, because then you have all of your elements isolated from the beginning. You can write in a characteristic style that is appropriate to the place you are evoking. If there's a specific sound, jazz, contemporary, or even like medieval music, like a Gregorian chant, that fits a location, you can draw on it and use that as a tool, as a tool that is heard within the piece, almost being heard by the performer, heard by the person experiencing the piece. And it's like a character within the piece. I think George Crumb was very famous for doing this. A really good example is within his Macrocosmos. There's a moment where you hear a quote from Fantasy Impromptu right in the middle of Macrocosmos, and it kind of, it has a significance there. Is the whole piece written in the style of Chopin? Absolutely not. If you know anything about Macrocosmos, it's the furthest thing from. But, it's... a soundscape, in my opinion, the part of it that makes it artistic is giving it some sort of an arc or some sort of a shape. So we don't just get lost. We can feel it going somewhere. And we do that by increasing the intensity or the frequency of, say, a tempo or harmony or rhythm or any of these other things. We can manipulate elements, and this is really what makes it a piece and not just a random experience, is creating the defined arc, creating the defined shape. And sometimes if we're talking about a piano miniature, it can be a very short shape. If we're talking about we could also have a very long shape, a very long arc, okay, over an hour. That is in the case of music for 18 musicians. Or, I think that was, I don't remember if it was Glass or Cage. It was one of those two who wrote a piece that was titled As Slow as Possible. And it's still being played. And it will continue to be played for hundreds of years. Now, is that an arc that anyone can possibly process in our lifetime? Probably not. But it is an idea that you could go extremely large scale. Now, granted, if you write me a piece that's supposed to take 600 years to perform, I don't think it'll get played within the context of this project. I'm sorry. Although I would applaud your boldness. Couple of challenges. There's kind of the popular conception of gentle atmospheric piano writing that you find on a Spotify playlist, which can get pigeonholed in the background music or even noise pollution. And I think a soundscape should really try to avoid this unless the piece is specifically playing on this expectation and then subverting it. But in any case, a soundscape needs to maintain enough musical interest and variety to keep the audience's attention. The piano can be quite limited with its timbral variety. And I love the idea of using extended techniques. I've used them in some of my pieces. But also, for the purposes of this project, we don't really. I talked to Julia Lee at PSU, and she said no extended techniques. So unfortunately, that's off the table here. So, anyways, let me talk a little bit about my soundscapes. There were 6 pieces. They average about 4 minutes each, and each one is actually no more than 3 pages. 3 pages of music. Each movement in this case was workshopped over the course of the school year, including in studio classes and private lessons where, I wasn't taking lessons on them, but the students were getting coached on them by Dr. Docine, and then I would come to studio classes and give comments to the performers as they would get better and better acquainted with the music. And I was able to kind of clarify some things or demonstrate a little bit if I needed to, about how something should be done. So anyways, let's get into the pieces. So I'm not gonna play through the entire piece of every piece because, well, actually, it's 8:07. We've got just enough time. I think I might be able to get through most of them. So the first one, this one was called The Silver Thaw. This piece was inspired by the Central Cascades and specifically kind of the ice storm phenomenon that we get where everything gets covered in a layer of ice by freezing rain that happens overnight. If you ever wake up and everything is covered in a sheen of ice, it's really beautiful. And it's very cool. It's also very slippery and very dangerous to drive on or even to walk on. It's kind of fun to walk on if you're brave and kind of stupid and not old, because then you can just kind of skate on your shoes. But I think most people would not necessarily want to do that. But it is really beautiful to look at. And then this piece is about that's the starting place of the soundscape. And then the soundscape is about what happens as it begins to thaw. The water drips and then dribbles and trickles and pours and finally builds to a big thundering roar. If you've ever been to, say, the Mackenzie River, right up along Mackenzie Pass, near Coosa Falls or the waterfalls up there, you'll notice it's like deep, it's like this light blue color and it's just pouring and pouring and pouring like crazy, and that's kind of where the piece ends up, with this water motive that just builds and builds and builds until finally we get to this big exposition or return kind of to the ice theme, but now it's, more fully harmonized. So in this one, I use some chord clusters. I use an open time signature, an open key signature, and then some aleatoric patterns. So this is kind of let me go and see if I can play this in the background here. I think I actually have this here. Here. All right, you guys hear that? Okay. Okay, because I don't hear it.
I can hear it.
Okay, tell me when to turn the page, someone. I'm going to turn the page.
Too soon.
Oh.
Okay, turn. Turn page. Turn page. Turn page. Bravo. That's
Alrighty.
it.
Alrighty. Now let me make sure. Alrighty, cool. Well, so that was the first one. And so as you notice, there's some aspects of tempo. There were some aspects of harmony, but did I necessarily want it to define the entire piece? I wanted to mess around a little bit with some of these ideas, and especially like the gestural idea, and kind of develop it and manipulate things to change over time and tell a story by doing so. That was over in a couple of minutes. So the second soundscape was called Marble Metamorphosis. This one was inspired by the Oregon Caves, which I visited as a kid with my family, and then I went back there last spring, and actually went with a friend of mine, and I got to experience it with a whole new perspective, because I went in knowing that I wanted to probably write something about the Oregon Caves. So it was a very illuminating and also very illuminating experience, especially when we turned on the lights. So the idea of marble metamorphosis, it's funny because marble is a metamorphic rock. It's a rock that transforms very slowly over time. And in this case, marble metamorphosis is about the various stages of the cave's transformation over thousands of years, which you experience as you walk through them. You go through all the different caves, and you see all the strange and almost alien structures. Like some of them look like tentacles or jellyfish, and they're hard as rock, but they're smooth and wet looking. In kind of this, it's like brownish gray, but very hard. It's a really, really incredible place. And yeah, there's a small narrative or romantic elements, like about the experience of wandering the caves, and it captures the imagination. And the piece is meant to capture flights of fancy in response to all of the cool structures that we see. And the tempo is very slow, which allows for a lot of play and a lot of different events to happen. A lot of different musical events and gestures that happen that don't necessarily feel like they have to be locked down. Although the key with this piece actually is keeping a pretty strict tempo so that the events feel random. Or not necessarily random, but yeah, they feel like they're in dialogue with each other. And, I took some inspiration here from Thomas 80s and Traced Overhead, which is one of my favorite piano pieces ever. And also the Scriabin Fourth Piano Sonata. There's a lot of Scriabin-esque harmonies in here. if you listen to the opening, there is definitely not a very direct quote of the Scriabin Fourth Piano Sonata. And I say definitely not. There absolutely is. Major seventh, and then a rising fourth motive. So it is very... but, of course, I take this a very different direction than Scriabin. So let me play through this one. Here. Oh, wait. Let me just wait till this. Alright, so this is kind of some pictures from inside the caves. Or, I guess one of them was outside the cave. Hear that all right?
Yes.
Again, I'll need a page turn alert.
Yes. Turn page. Turn page. Turn page. Turn page. Turn page.
Alrighty.
Oh, one more chord.
Oh, sorry. There we go.
Very nice.
Alrighty, cool. Well, anyways, so that was my cave piece. It was funny because I think one of the submissions I got was also about the Oregon caves. And I hate to tell that composer, but I kind of did a piece about that already. So I think that one might have to be a duplicate, or that one might have to get left. Which is a shame because it's a good piece. Anyway, so that was the Oregon caves. So now on to number 3, which this one is called Shades of Pristine, which is a title I wanted to use, kind of inspired by the pristine mountain lakes that we have up in the Cascades. I was thinking specifically of Waldo Lake, actually, which is one of my favorite places to go to, although lately it's really hard to get to because it's under snow most of the year, and then the rest of the time there's a ton of mosquitoes or there's forest fires, and half the area around the lake is burnt. So this is really more of a memory of Waldo Lake because it's really not somewhere I can go to right now, unfortunately. But there's a lot of other beautiful ones: Crescent Lake, Sparks Lake, Diamond Lake. They're all really, really beautiful and really clear. But Waldo Lake especially is so pristine. You can go to the middle and get in the water, and you can see down into the water many, many, many feet down, and see the bottom, because that's how clean and clear it is. You know, there's almost no algae grows in it. And also, this was the one I mentioned. This was the one that was played by Andrew Canestra, and he did a wonderful, phenomenal job with this piece. I didn't give him a whole lot to work with, to be honest, as you'll see. There was a lot of things that I really left up to the performer, and I really just kind of gave a template and said, here's the piece. Here are the notes. This is one of the cases where this really is a piece where things happen in time rather than in tempo. And tempo is a factor occasionally, but it's not always tempo is a factor sometimes, but it's not necessarily the driving force of the piece at all times. And the idea was that it's a very meditative, serene opening. And then the left-hand melody, when it enters, is really quite static in a lot of ways. It just changes only by either being doubled in octaves or moving down into a deeper and deeper register. So anyways, let me get on here. Here's a score. Let me play this one. Here. So this is a picture I took at Crescent Lake.
Turn page. Maybe turn page?
Is the left-hand melody enter yet?
Just started.
Okay. Page turns when it comes back in octaves.
Turn page? Turn page? Okay. I was a little late. I was a little late with that last page turn. Sorry.
Oh, that's fine. It's all right. So, anyways, I am thinking that for the sake of time, unfortunately, I'm not going to cover the other three because it's already 8:30, and I really wanted to have some time for questions and also have some time to read through some of the submissions. So, I am going to give a quick, like a Reader's Digest version. I'm not going to play through them. But basically, Soundscape 4, which is the Violent Pacific, I can actually just demonstrate a little bit on the piano for this one. This one was also water-themed, but meant to contrast directly with Shades of Pristine. I wanted to explore the chaotic, powerful side of Oregon's favorite element, water. We're surrounded by it here all the time. And the ocean is what is more chaotic and powerful than the ocean. And so this one, I kind of took a page out of Liszt's book, with kind of the flashy pianism. And it's because I was writing this for a friend of mine who's a undergrad, and he's a very flashy he loves the flashy virtuosic stuff. So I wrote this piece with him in mind. This was inspired by the violence of a crashing wave during king tide. If you go down to Cape Perpetua, you'll see some of the violent waves crashing up there if you go at high tide. So anyways, let me just play a little bit of the opening here. Hold on to your earphones. I'm gonna try not to blast them out. So, some very, like, note cluster sort of things. And then, we've got these rolling sort of sound, rolling waves, and then I think it's not too low, but anyways, you kind of get this wave crash and another crash and then a melody. And then back to this. And then, of course, now the note clusters. The idea is that your right hand's on the black keys, your left hand's on the white keys, and they're alternating very fast. In kind of the same idea of like a list in, where our list would have the alternating octaves. Right, it has this alternating chromatic octaves. The idea is I took that and now turned that into a waves. So, you get the idea here. So, kind of this very violent, dramatic sort of thing that we'd almost never get to do on the piano because it's so crude and so raw. But I think it's very cool, and I always impress people when I show them, and so I figured this would be an interesting thing to put into a piece about the ocean. And then it kind of ends with this descending melody. All right, I'm going to skip to number 5 now. This is In the Rose Garden. This is a very different kind of piece. Completely opposite. Because I want to create the narrative by individual soundscapes, each of which has a focused idea, rather than having to put everything into one soundscape. So this one is very romantic, free, melodic, rhapsodic. It's actually written in a key signature, which I didn't write a key signature for any of the other pieces here. But it doesn't use a time signature for the first part. It does use a time signature for this middle section, which is actually quite syncopated, kind of in the style of a lyrical song tune, almost a popular song. It's kind of a song without words, but modern. And it's funny because I was actually originally wrote this for a Brazilian pianist whose father was a very, is a big, kind of a big deal down there as a recording artist doing popular Brazilian tunes. And so I listened to some of her dad's stuff, and I thought, oh, this would be interesting. And like, which piece does this make me? Which part of Oregon does this remind me of? And I was like thinking about it, and I was like, oh, you know what? The Rose Garden, the Test Rose Garden at Washington Park. I love that place. I have a lot of happy, also a lot of bittersweet memories there from, time in high school. And the opening, very, very melodic, very rhapsodic. Very long phrases. So very long phrases. And then the second section here is very syncopated. This is kind of the more popular song. The idea. It's kind of if you hear that melody, it's kind of the whole second section is based off of that, just modulates through a billion different keys, and then happens again in octaves, and then we get this little short return to the main idea to end it all. so again, this is show that, like, you know, not every soundscape has to be super literal. Not every soundscape has to be aleatoric. Not every soundscape has to feel experimental or in any way. You can write something simple and beautiful and focused. If it evokes a specific memory or a specific emotion of a place that is really strong for you, and if it's strong for you, it's probably strong for other people, and that's what I want in a piece. That's what I'm looking for. It's something that evokes a strong emotion that is focused and is limited in the ideas, so that those few ideas can be developed and then grow into something beautiful, rather than having to throw everything into one place.
Right.
And then the last piece here, this was written for probably the most virtuosic pianist of the lineup. This was written for Jun Yoon, who's a Korean pianist. Absolutely incredible technique. You know, and I've known him for quite a while. He's getting his DMA at U of O right now. And so I wanted to write something kind of toccata-esque to finish it all off. You know, because he played the Prokofiev toccata at his master's recital. So I wanted to write something for him that was kind of in that vein. So I did this piece called Igneous, which, if you remember, marble is a metamorphic rock, which means it changes slowly over a long period of time. Igneous rock is usually stuff that's expelled from a volcanic eruption. We have tons of it around Oregon, by the way. It's part of why our soil grows so well, is because we have all these volcanoes and all this volcanic soil that is a part of our geology. And especially if you go hike around Newberry Crater, you'll find all the obsidian and igneous rock that's up there. You know, obviously there's also Mount St. Helens, Belknap Crater, the Three Sisters. They all have all this igneous rock that comes from a volcano. And so this is kind of a contrast to the second soundscape. You know, the second soundscape was kind of the peaceful side, like the rock that just grows over thousands of years from water gently dripping in the Oregon caves. And then this is the violent contrast, just how Violent Pacific was the contrast to Shades of Pristine. You know, and so, you know, the harmonic language for this one is kind of pentatonic chord clusters and some chromatic harmonies. But you'll see what I mean here. It opens up with this very low rumble. You know, it's like an earthquake. But then it's gone. And then it's back. And then go to this menacing motive of fear. But then it fades away to nothing. And now a little bit more energy. So we kind of build up like this till finally we get to the earthquake finally begins to happen. The eruption begins. Right? Kind of this growl that builds and builds and builds until builds up. You know, kind of builds and builds and builds. You know, we get more explosions, jumps into different registers. This section I've been practicing. I'm not going to play it because it's really hard.
Insane.
I think I could kind of do it. Wait. You know, it's kind of it's hard to do while looking back and forth. If I really focused up, I could probably do it. But anyway, you can, and then the mountain collapses violently. It's like always happen. We know so many volcanoes that they erupt and then they collapse. As that happened with Newberry, happened with Mount St. Helens. You're just left with this shell of a mountain. Right. And even after you have the shell of a mountain, sometimes there's still a threat, like with Mount St. Helens. We still have this lurking threat that it could happen again. Because geology, it never comes to an end. It only pauses.
Right.
So anyways,
wow.
Questions?
Everybody's on mute, I think. Hey, everybody, you're on mute. Is that me?
Okay. My computer just died like 2 minutes ago, so I didn't hear the transition to this point, right as you were in the middle of the other piece. So the questions, but questions in general, let's see. Yeah, I was about to ask a question, and I actually think you explained it pretty well, but I guess it's more that it's, you want more of a, there's got to be an atmospheric vibe. It's got to be not so much the long extended version of a bunch of different things happening. It's supposed to be a smaller quantity of ideas. So that's more what you're looking for with this idea for this. Is that correct?
Yes, with these pieces I really wanted short form. I wanted miniatures, okay. and so this project, this score call, I kind of want to follow with that. And that's the thing. I'm not saying that you have to write in my style. I don't expect that. And I'm also not saying that you have to write in a contemporary style, whatever that means. If that's something that you don't want to do, personally, if you feel like, I don't want to write serialism, or I don't want to write minimalism, you don't have to write serialism, you don't have to write minimalism. There are other ways to reduce your ideas than using those tools, those styles. But what I'm looking for, regardless, is like you could write something that's very simple and, harmonically simple and melodically simple. And I think simplicity is actually more what I'm going for. I think complexity, like especially something that's like long, 9 pages, 12 pages of music, I just don't see that having a place in the Soundscapes project. I mean, even if it's a great piece, I don't know if that would have a place in the project, just because something long like that, like if the time is very short, like, because I think Andrew had a couple pieces that were long, but that's because they were fast and they were still over in 3 minutes. It's like, I think the Prokofiev Toccata is like 20 pages, but it's over in 4.5 minutes. Now, if you send me something that is as hard as the Prokofiev Toccata, I may have a hard time convincing my pianist to take it on. It's not to say it's impossible, but think about it more. If you're thinking about like the amount of difficulty, think about it more like pictures at an exhibition. That would actually be a really wonderful, if you're looking for music to study for this project, look at Pictures at an Exhibition by Mussorgsky. Because with all of those, it's a very specific idea, very focused miniature. And then what happens is, there might be like an ending that's really hard. There might be something really challenging. It's okay for there to be a measure or two that's really challenging. But if the whole thing is just leaps and dense chords and, it's like there's a couple of pieces I got where I was like looking through this and I was like, I just don't feel like learning this. I just don't feel like playing this. Like if you're going to submit something hard, you better darn well make it worth it to work on because learning something like that for a performance takes hours and hours and hours and hours of drilling the same thing over and over again. And if you hate it by the time you're done with it, as sometimes happens anyway, it's not a pleasant experience for the performer. So that's kind of the case where if you're keeping your performers in mind when you're composing, it's okay. It's actually better to give them something to show off their talent, to show off their skills. And there is a way to write that sounds flashy and is not hard to play for a pianist who has a degree. Okay. And by the way, my performers, the people who've been playing your music, they both won the concerto competition playing Rachmaninoff piano concertos. They are, incredibly talented. So they've got chops. Okay, so they've got chops, but you want to give them things that are you want to give them things that can show off their chops rather than things that they're going to have to slog through, disentangling page after page of dense writing that isn't all that rewarding, And that's not to say you can't write something that takes more work, but you absolutely, it's not to say that you can't write something that takes more work, but sometimes the stuff that takes more work to understand is the stuff that's actually the case where less is more. It's like, I have the puzzle pieces, how do I put this together? Rather than dumping a 10,000 piece puzzle in someone's head and... Sorry, what?
Oh, I'm not sure. Somebody else I think asked a question, or somebody else was speaking. I'm not sure who it was. There's somebody in there.
Someone...
Oh, is it Ilana? I don't know. I guess for a logistical question, since you went through all those 20 pieces, if you went through them and you said you wrote like a paragraph on each one of them.
Yeah, I don't think I got through all of them. There might be one or two that got missed, but I didn't have a ton of time. But I went through and I have feedback for all of them.
That's great. I kind of think, especially if your feedback is the piece won't really work for this, like there's still time in theory for us to submit another piece, whoever might submit one. So.
Yeah, there is. I think, I was kind of hoping that by talking about some of the things that I'm looking for, you can think, oh, did this thing I submitted, does that meet these parameters? Does this meet these parameters? And so if you're able to kind of think about that, it's like, okay, if it doesn't, if I submitted something that is 12 pages long and really, really hard, now is the chance to say, okay, let me try again. But let me go through some of the pieces that I did like. I wanted to try to be done by 9, so we got like 10 minutes.
Let me just stick my nose in here.
Yeah, Jeff.
I'm willing to, if you want to those paragraphs to go back to the composers. If you send those to me, I'm willing to distribute them to the composers.
Okay, that might be helpful then. I can send that to you then.
Think about that.
Yeah, so
I'm willing to help.
Yeah, so let me just go through some of these that I got though, because some of these I really enjoyed, and I think can have a lot of potential. I got one. I'm going to talk about like 3 of them, probably 2 or 3 of them. One I really liked. I got a piece called Zumwalt Prairie, which I looked it up, and that's somewhere up on the East Coast, or somewhere on Eastern Oregon. And it starts, and it has these blocked chords, long like whole notes with fermatas. Let me actually go and see. I actually can pull up the file so I can talk about some of these. Zumwalt Prairie. So can you guys see that all right here? Okay, so this was one that let me explain this.
I'm not seeing it.
I can see it. It says
Really?
some of it's coming through. Yeah, it's coming through for some of us. Yeah.
Okay, so like this here, these chords. First of all, I would rather roll these chords. Here's one thing. That crescendo is not placed because we can't crescendo on a chord. So we're here. If you mean for us to crescendo here to there, then maybe the crescendo should go further back and the forte be under the chord rather than in the middle, because that suggests that we're supposed to be crescendoing. What are we going to do? Are we going to do a tremolando on that? My other thought with this is that, for instance, here, I would not write this metered. If I was writing this, I would not even make them whole notes. I would just make them notes without a stem. And they would just, no meter, no tempo, just say proceed as you want it. Roll it if you want to. You know, this is a place where I would give a lot of freedom to the performer. And I think that that's in line with the composer's intention, because further down in the piece, they actually have a section where it says, if desired, one may elaborate or improvise on this section. Right? And so you could improvise on this section. And so I think that framing these long chords, you could frame these long chords as happening outside of tempo, outside of a meter, and just kind of hanging in time, and the performer can go through them as they want to. You could even make it a cell if you want. Anyways, I really enjoyed the wandering lines in here. Okay, let me move on. Let me look here. There was another one that I really liked. Sketches in the Tunnel, which was one about Salem. I really liked this one because it was kind of, let me see if I find it on here. It's under Salem Kaiser Graffiti Art. I really liked this one, the tunnel theme here. So. Wait, no, that's the chord. I like the idea here, especially of the heavy and dirty. So my thought with this is that the whole piece follows this idea where you have the tunnel theme, and then you have different sketches, and it goes from one to the other. My thought, though, with this... I really like a lot of these ideas, and they're very concentrated. I would say you should actually spend more time on these ideas, because the piece is quite short. The piece is only 3 minutes. I wish that we had more than one statement of these. I'd say you could build this out. I would be okay if this was built out to 5 or 6 pages. And we had more space to develop these ideas rather than just hearing them once. Because some of them are really good ideas. And I want to hear more of them. But this is something that, I didn't cover. You know, we didn't cover graffiti, didn't cover or street art or anything like that. And I think it could be a very cool kind of imaginative soundscape to bring to life. So that's kind of my main comment with this one, Sketches in the Tunnel. Let me look here. Up Hurricane Creek was one that I really liked. Because this one was very pianistic in a lot of ways. I think I actually had the score for this one. I did have the score. I just want to play a little bit of this because this one's a very beautiful piece. Very pianistic. Right, so this is a sort of thing that's going to be very effective in a performance. You know, I think my main beef with this one was actually just, there's a couple of engraving things that I was like, is it possible that we could have a tempo not colliding? Have some little tiny things not colliding with each other. That was honestly my main beef, is just with the details of the engraving, just because I have OCD and those things bother me. So, but this is a rough draft. And actually, formatting thing, you could probably get away with making these, see, pedal right there in the middle here, of the of the notes, pedal marking right here in the middle of the notes. You could get away, something that would solve most of these problems, and see if you can figure out how to make a smaller rastral size and scale everything down just like a 1 or 2 steps, so that you have more space on the page. The notes are a little bit smaller, and you have more room to put things where they're not colliding. That's something you could do. I don't know if this is made in Finale or Sibelius or Dorico or what, but I know that's a feature that most engraving softwares have. That's something that would help this piece a lot, because the music was actually very enjoyable to play. Let's see if I have time for one more. Let me see. Which ones did I have in here? Beneath the Surface was a piece I really enjoyed. I actually don't think I had a whole lot of comments for this one. Cape Lookout Images I got. I have nothing to say for that one. That one is very, like, that looks like, some of these look like really like a final submission. And my thought is, if you submitted something that is like really short and is 2 parts of the same topic, I'm okay with that, actually. I'm okay with including both, because they're part of the same topic. What I probably wouldn't include 2 pieces from the same composer on the same topic, but I would include 2 pieces, by the same composer that are connected as like different sections of the same topic, if that makes sense. I think that there's a slight difference there. Riparian Entertainments I really enjoyed playing through. I think this was one that I have a thought here. This is an example of a piece that I really think is a strong piece, but also is too broad. Okay, so this piece is called The Oregon Coast, and I like it musically. I like this progression here musically, but my main beef actually is with the title is just too broad, and that's the thing is that the title is like are we going to have a piece about the whole Oregon coast in Oregon Soundscapes? We already have multiple pieces about the Oregon coast, about specific places, so now we're going to have something that just encompasses the entire coast. And so I think this is an example, and I think the music also suffers from this a little bit in the context of this project, where it puts too many ideas in one place. Now, if this piece, say, just took 1 or 2 like sections from this piece, which I think is 6 pages, but if this piece only took a couple of sections and focused on those, instead of making it like this longer form thing, I would be more inclined to include it. So this is kind of my example of something that could, I think could be more compelling if it was like shorter form, right? And there's a couple of pieces I got that are like that, where if it's shorter form, I'm more interested in something that's like miniature than something that is really expansive, like a ballade or a sonata form or something like that. I mean, I love sonatas. I've written sonatas, I love those sorts of things, but I'm but the purpose of the Soundscapes is to write miniatures. So that's anyways, I think that's all that I wanted to go through here. Anyways, I think that is about it from me. Thank you, everyone, for coming and listening to me yap for an hour and a half.
Well, that was quite a lot. Yeah, that was quite a lot. Very, very enjoyable, Stephen.
Yes, nicely done. Thank you so much. It's been great.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you so much for that. That was cool to hear all that and to get a better idea about it and learn all about the word soundscape and all that too. So thank you. So
I was also relieved in that the kinds of things you talked about. I can see that I'm not off base. I think I have the right idea about this project. And
Good.
can go forward with confidence.
Okay, I really, really, really wanted to communicate, just to be clear, this is what I'm looking for. Because a lot of the time when you get a score call and they'll just put a general, like, instrumentation. We want stuff for this instrumentation and this time limit. And that's all the info they give you. They don't tell you anything else about, like, artistically. And so you're stuck, like, I don't know what the tastes and what this person wants, so I'm just gonna send something just send something that I've already had performed 100 times, and hopefully they like it, and I'm trying to be a little bit more focused. This is a curated project after all, so I'm trying to be focused and curate a theme, and I'm trying to make sure that people who are submitting know what the theme is and know what the expectations are, what I'm looking for. So if you submitted something already, you have until like August to make revisions, and I promise you I won't make any decisions about the piece, about the music until then. So, anyways, I think Andrew had to dip, but he's getting on the road, so that's fine. Anyways, I thank you everyone for coming. Any other questions?
Thank you. I wanted to say I really love Jeff's idea of getting the feedback of the pieces from you, Stephen, and facilitating getting those to the anonymous composers. I think that's a format that can really serve us in the future too, of helping composers kind of not feel so in the blind in getting from point A to point B. I don't think that's something we've done before, and I'm obsessed. A little extra bit of care that we can show our members,
I agree.
Yeah, so Stephen, if you want to just send me those comments, just identified by piece, and I'll make sure they get back to the right composers.
Alrighty, yeah. Thank you for the comment. Thank you for the kind comments, everyone. This is I spent way too much time thinking about this. I spent so much time putting together a presentation, and sorry if it went over long. But
it was
I tried to.
informative. Yeah,
not a problem.
Yeah, I think it'd be great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right.
Cool.
Thank you, everyone.
Hey, thanks. See you later.
All right. See you later.